Every revolution starts in the minds of the people. Arm yourself for the war of ideas. Take back your life. Take back your liberty. Tom Mullen Talks Freedom.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Tom Mullen Talks Freedom. Today is Sunday, June 21st, Father's Day. Happy Father's Day to all my fellow fathers out there. It's also the summer solstice, so some of you pagans may be dancing around a pole or slaughtering a bull or whatever you do. Also, tangentially, John the Baptist's birthday for all you Christians out there, since he was, of course, I think they celebrated on June 20, which lines up with the summer solstice 2,000 years ago. The solstice actually moves back in the calendar over time. But anyway, didn't come to talk about all that, but happy to everybody as far as whatever you may be celebrating today. And just a nice day here in Western New York as well. Sunny and in the low 70s. Perfect weather. And for one brief shining moment, we also had world peace. Not really world peace, but at least peace in the Middle East for a few hours, I guess, is what you could really say, because the Trump administration and Trump himself signed a memorandum of understanding with Iran, ending hostilities. And a memorandum of understanding says, these are the points we basically agree to discuss and somewhat agree about in general. And then we're going to get down to the details over the next 60 days. So it was not a formal treaty or agreement. It was a memorandum of understanding. And, you know, it would be expected that both sides would kind of argue and negotiate about the fine details of each point. But overall, I mean, let's just call it what it is. It's exactly the agreement that I've been saying since at least April is the only one that the Iranians would ever sign, which is a complete agreement to all of their demands. That's what it was. I mean, their main demands have always been, number one, we're not giving up our missiles. Number two, we're going to keep enriching uranium for peaceful purposes. And number three, you're going to pay for all this damage you caused. And number four, you're going to give us our own money back, which is a small fraction of the money they're demanding to be paid in reparations. And basically, the United States agreed to it all. Why? And I'll post a link to the transcript of the actual memorandum of understanding so that you can read it for yourself. It's got 14 points. And I want to read the first one to you, especially to go over exactly why this memorandum of understanding is already either null and void or at least in great jeopardy. But the reason that the United States basically unconditionally surrendered to Iran instead of vice versa was there was no choice. I mean, there was no other option that was viable. So there were three things the United States could do. They could sign an agreement like this, basically give in to Iran's demands. They could go back to bombing them, which Trump, constantly threatens to do. Or they could just stand pat and not do anything, either walk away or just keep up the blockade and wait Iran out. Now, the reason they couldn't go back to bombing them, they could, but it wasn't going to do any good. And the United States is starting to run low on stockpiles of these weapons. Now, they do keep replacing them, but they were using them during the heavy bombardment the first 40 days faster than they could replace them. So they don't want to do that and get to a point where if they needed them for some other reason, which is unlikely, but if they did, they wouldn't have enough. So that's why really, and there's nothing more to do in Iran. They've hit all the targets. You remember when the heavy bombardment was underway, Pete Hegseth was coming out and bragging about how many targets they hit, thousands and thousands of targets. And there's not really much reason to dispute that. And as I said all along, during that time, after that time, Iran kind of had that baked in. They had it baked in that, look, we are going to take significant damage above the ground. We're going to lose, some capabilities, and we're going to experience some loss of life and economic loss if the United States ever decides to come after us. So that all happened. That all, as far as what Hegseth is saying, is true. The problem is that Iran had all that underground capability. They still have capabilities to hit back at the U.S., certainly not with the force that the U.S. has to hit against them, but that's not necessary. And this is where the strategic part of this comes out and why Iran won the war. They didn't win the war because they could defeat the United States on the battlefield. They won the war because they outmaneuvered the United States. And frankly, as I said in a previous podcast, it wasn't that hard to do. All they have to do is be able to close the strait. And to close the strait, they don't have to resist like a U.S. Navy all-out assault on the strait. They just have to be able to fire rockets into it from far away and drones. And they've retained their ability to do that. And that means these $500 million and $1 billion vessels, privately owned, are not going to sail through there until they know they're not going to be hit or run into a mine. So Iran basically won the war. And I had an episode sometime in April saying we're already in the post-Iran war period. And I was saying Iran's already won. They've closed the strait. The U.S. can't reopen it. They've bombed U.S. bases. The U.S. evacuated them, thank goodness. So our troops weren't hit, as 6 or 7, I guess, have died, which is not nothing, but it could have been a lot worse. And but the point is the U.S. can't go back to those bases. And that's another point in the MOU, is that the U.S. agrees to withdraw from the bases that are closest to Iran. I mean, this is incredible. So when you talk, what was the effect of the U.S. operations against Iran? It was to cause a lot of damage, but it was not to destroy the regime. It was not to render Iran incapable of responding militarily. It was not to open the strait, and it was not to make the bases safe once again. So they were ineffectual. You can count up how many targets you hit and say, look, we hit 3,000 targets and they only hit 15. Fine, but theirs had an impact and yours did not. And so as we sit here today, the U.S. is still unable to open the strait without Iran agreeing to do it. They're unable to return their soldiers to the military bases, which were previously surrounding Iran. And those bases have been bombed and damaged. To what extent, I'm open to a lot of, I don't know. I've seen pictures. Look, this building's damaged. Okay, well, what about those ones that aren't damaged? Okay, I'm very cognizant that the people who were against this war from the beginning, including myself, have a tendency, perhaps, and I don't know that this is true, but perhaps, to exaggerate the damage done to the bases and exaggerate other aspects of what Iran has done. But what we do know for sure is that they've closed the strait and no one can reopen it but them. Okay? So getting back to the 3 options, keep bombing them, not going to do any good, going to deplete U.S. munitions even farther. Just stand pat was also not an option because Trump came right out and said it on television in an interview that, we had a few weeks of oil reserves left. They've depleted the national strategic, what is it called? The Strategic Petroleum Reserve, the SPR. They've depleted it by about half, a little bit more than half. From what I understand, as I sit here, it holds a maximum of 714 million gallons, and there's about 340 million left. so a little less than half. But you have to keep replenishing that. I mean, that the daily use of the United States means that 340 million gallons is only a few weeks more of reserves. Now, of course, we only need to make up for 20% of the world's oil reserves not flowing right now, or maybe a little less than 20%. So again, Trump said it was a few more weeks. Who knows if he knows if that's true or not? He, as we all know, he just says shit. And I'm sure when he says it, he believes it. Whether it's true or not is another story. So I was trying to do that calculation, and I thought it was more like a few months that the reserves would allow the United States to keep a lid on gas prices. Now they're elevated, but they would be elevated a lot more if not for what they've used out of the reserves. So anyway, according to Trump and according to reality, there's a time limit on waiting Iran out. And don't forget, again, the closing of the strait to this point has already caused damage that's down the road. Now, again, the people who are against the war saying this is going to be a really huge economic hit. I don't know. We don't know the future. It stands to reason that, if oil has been held up all this time, it's not like, okay, we open the strait and there's this big glut of gasoline that's going to drive the price down. No, it's got to sail to the refineries. It's got to be processed by the refineries, and then it's got to be delivered, to the wholesalers and retailer, et cetera. I mean, through the supply chain. And from what I understand, that's many weeks. So we still have some kind of a shock coming that's been delayed. So again, I don't know if that's as bad as what the MAGA people would call the doomers, but the people against the war, I'm not saying that they're lying. I'm just saying that they have a tendency to want to exaggerate that, to say, see, I was against the war and this is going to be really bad. But it's going to be something. I mean, we're going to pay some kind of price for this. It's just like COVID. You can't shut down, half of society, tell them to stop producing anything, tell them to keep on consuming, and you don't have some kind of cost for that. Now, we didn't pay the cost. The great thing about Trump is, most of the inflation, and when I say inflation, I mean creation of new money by the Federal Reserve, that mostly happened under Trump in 2020 to underwrite these trillions of dollars we sent out to people and told them to spend, to keep on spending like they were still working when they weren't. Okay. And then the price inflation mostly hit under Biden, but that was caused by the money. Now, some of the money was printed when Biden was already president, and Biden was partially responsible by having his own big spending program. So he's not scot-free in this, but the bulk of it was Trump. And the fact that they shut down society was all Trump, because if he didn't sign the CARES Act, lockdowns would have been a week long, because no state was going to be able to fund people staying home and not producing anything and going on consuming. So I digress to say that the example has been set with COVID that we didn't feel the pain till years later, or a year and 4 years later, a year later, and then for years after that. We're still feeling it. Prices have not gone down. They're never going to go down because prices have adjusted to the new supply of money, which is up around 22 trillion, according to M2, where it was 15 trillion before COVID. Okay. And just like that, we're going to feel this wars, the closing of the strait later, and how painful that is. Even if this ceasefire holds, remains to be seen, but there's going to be pain. Okay, so that's why option number 2, stand pat, was not an option for Trump, and he understood that. So the only other option of the 3, keep bombing, stand pat, or cave into all Iran's demands, was he caved in, and he did the rational thing. This is the America first thing to do, was, okay, I really screwed up starting this war. We're just going to surrender. and walk away. I'll call it a victory, and that's fine with me. As I said in April, I don't care if he, what baloney he pushes that this was some kind of victory. That's fine with me as long as the war ends. Now, the wrinkle has been that we're back to Trump threatening to destroy Iran's civilization. He hasn't said those words this time. This time he's just said Iran is finished. And that is due to a bombing campaign by Israel that was in response. And it's important we, keep all this straight. In this case, Israel was responding to an attack by Hezbollah. So Hezbollah did some kind of rocket or drone attack and killed, I think, 4 Israeli soldiers, or at least 3, because I saw 3 being mourned on X, and maybe severely injured a 4th. And of course, Israel responded by hitting 150 targets, they said. So, the response was over the top, of course, but at least it was a response. Now, here is the problem with this being like self-defense. The Israeli soldiers that were killed were in Lebanon. And so that's where it gets muddy. I want to read the memorandum of understanding. I'll put it up on the screen so you guys can read along with me. Bear with me a second here while I do that. So I'm sharing my screen, and you should be able to see this memorandum of understanding. And here's the first paragraph. The United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran and their allies in the current war, by signing this MOU, declare the immediate and permanent termination of military operations on all fronts, including in Lebanon, and undertake from now on not to initiate any war or military operation against each other, and to refrain from the threat or use of force against each other, and ensuring the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. The final deal will confirm the permanent termination of the war on all fronts, including in Lebanon, and other provisions of this paragraph. So hopefully it didn't escape you that the two parties are only mentioned once, but the country Lebanon is mentioned 3 times. So, they mentioned Lebanon 3 times, and the U.S. signed off on this. So Iran didn't want any confusion this time if Lebanon was included. And notice the territorial integrity of Lebanon, meaning, Israel, you have to leave. So remember, as I've said many times, Hezbollah, which is not a bunch of great guys. These are not good people, okay? You can call them terrorists. I mean, they shoot rockets into Lebanon, and I'm not sure they discriminate about what targets they hit. I don't think they do. So that makes them terrorists. If they hit civilian targets for a political purpose, then that meets the definition of terrorism. But they're a militant group, and it's not like, no other countries have ever bombed civilians, including the United States. But their sole reason for existence is to resist Israel's incursions into the territory of Lebanon. They operate in Lebanon. That's where they are. And that's where they killed these Israeli soldiers. Now, Israel, this is so muddy that, there's all kinds of qualifications to every part of this. But number one, the U.S. started the war with Israel. It was a joint war between the United States and Israel against Iran. And the United States made this deal without Israel being present, even being in the negotiations. So Israel, immediately upon learning of the MOU, said, we're not leaving Lebanon. Well, that violates the part in there about the territorial integrity and sovereignty of Lebanon. Now, the MOU is an MOU, and it doesn't specify how long Lebanon gets to leave. I mean, we're talking within days of the signing, 1 or 2 days, Hezbollah attacks the troops in Lebanon because they've declared they're not leaving. But they're in Lebanon, okay? So they're in somebody else's country. They've invaded that country, and they've said their purpose is to attack Hezbollah, which operates from there and does fire into Israel. And that's true, that Hezbollah does do that. So fires rockets. They don't go in. I don't think they've gone into the territory of northern Israel. They may have run a few operations and like kidnapped some soldiers. I'm not sure about that, but generally they exist to defend Lebanon against Israel. So in a perfect world, Israel leaves Lebanon, and then Hezbollah doesn't have an excuse for this. And then Israel doesn't get to overreact as it did and probably killed hundreds of civilians, along with claiming to kill dozens of terrorists. I don't know if I want to take the time to read every one of these points. I think number 2 is important too, because there's something else I want to talk about here. Number 2, the United States of America and the Islamic Republic of Iran undertake to respect each other's sovereignty and territorial integrity and to refrain from interfering in each other's internal affairs. So that's a funny one because Iran doesn't interfere in the United States internal affairs. They've never overthrown the United States government or even tried. They don't have the capability to, and they haven't. But the United States rather routinely tries to overthrow the Iranian government, and they did successfully in 1953, which started this whole, all of my life and then some hostility between Iran and the United States. Now, remember, 1953 was during the Cold War, near the very beginning of the Cold War. And that had a lot to do with why the United States did this. But this talking point that Iran has been at war with the United States for 47 years is such total bullshit. And I don't mind hearing Pete Hegseth say it or Trump or Marco Rubio, but when I hear it repeated by, everyday American citizens, it really is quite galling. So the reason they say 47 years is that's the year 1979. And I remember when this happened. I was 13 years old, about to turn 14, when Iran had the revolution and they put in the Ayatollah Khomeini, the first Ayatollah, and then they attacked the U.S. Embassy and took 400 and some State Department hostages. Okay, and that supposedly was the first act of war by Iran, and they've been at war with us ever since. Now, of course, this begs the question, why did they attack the United States Embassy? Why didn't they attack the French Embassy? Why didn't they attack the Swiss agency or embassy? Why didn't they attack the British Embassy? Why didn't they attack the Russian Embassy? Okay, the reason that they attacked the United States Embassy and took hostages from U.S. State Department officials is because, and this is true to this day, that U.S. embassies in most foreign countries are also bases of operation for the CIA. And after the United States overthrew the democratically elected Prime Minister Mossadegh in 1953, they replaced him with the Shah of Iran, who was the ruler of Iran for all of my childhood. I was born in 65. He's already in there for 11 or 12 years. And of course, the Iranian people didn't want him. That's why he was in exile. They brought him back, and the way he stayed in power was U.S. support. And a big part of the U.S. support for the Shah were covert operations run out of the U.S. embassy in Iran. That's why they were so pissed off about the embassy. These people don't do things for no reason. You don't have to like them. You don't have to agree with them, but there was some reason they attacked that embassy. And this is the same as the reason they attacked the Benghazi embassy in 2000 Either it was 11 or 13, I don't remember, because it was that the CIA runs operations out of the embassies. Okay. They're not just peaceful diplomats, with some nice plushy offices. Every embassy that the United States has, especially in countries that it has targeted, are bases for operation for the CIA and other covert intelligence and covert military operations. And that's why they did that. So, the Mossadegh overthrow in 1953 was because he wanted to nationalize the Iranian oil industry. Like many socialists, they get in power, they nationalize oil. Now, I mean, this wasn't like they were seizing private property or anything. They were nationalizing it from the socialist government of the United Kingdom, and the government owned oil company that is now privatized and named BP, but at the time was owned by the government. And they did offer compensation for this, as most socialist countries do when they seize an industry like this, just so they don't get attacked, not because they're good guys. And the United Kingdom did not accept the compensation offered. So the United States and MI6 together fomented a revolution in Iran and overthrew the government and replaced Mossadegh with the Shah, who was very friendly to the United States, of course, being their puppet. And he was there until 1979 when he got overthrown by this revolution. So the war didn't start 47 years ago in 1979, and it wasn't started by Iran. It was started by the United States and the United Kingdom in 1953, and the 1979 revolution was a response to that. Not only overthrow of their government, but the maintenance in power of a rather brutal dictator with a secret police very comparable to the Stasi in East Germany. That's why they did that. And then we get, from the proponents of this preposterous 47-year war theory, well, what else did they do? They attacked our Marines in 1982. Now, first of all, this was not done by Iran or Iranians. This was done by Lebanese militants who would later become Hezbollah. And yes, they were supported by Iran. How much coordination for this particular attack is a matter of debate. There may have been some. Even if there was, I mean, this is Iran responding to the war that the United States was fighting against them as a proxy war, supporting Saddam Hussein, including giving Hussein chemical weapons to use against the Iranians. A war that was very costly to Iran and lasted the better part of the 1980s. So when they're hitting our Marines in Lebanon, this is not like it's just done in a vacuum because the great Satan. This is a war tactic against military men while they were being hit with weapons of mass destruction supplied by the United States. Now, the United States laundered these weapons through a handful of countries, but nobody disputes at this point that the United States backed Saddam Hussein. He was our guy back then. And that was the whole idea, was that we were going to make him strong so that he would check Iran, who, by the way, during the Cold War was an ally of the Soviet Union. Okay, so that whole part of it comes in. And of course, they would support back in 53 a guy like Mossadegh nationalizing the oil industry. So part of the motivation was, of course, this worldwide war against the Soviet Union, the Cold War. So we fought many proxy wars underneath that, including the one in the 80s against Iran. But this is what Iran was responding to in the 80s. And then you don't hear very much after that. Supposedly every roadside bomb in Iraq is the work of the Iranians. Because again, the resistance in Iran is the Shiite majority, whom Iran would support. Of course, the Shiites are in control of the United States now because the United States foolhardily went in and knocked out Saddam Hussein, who they just 5 minutes ago had been saying is the only check against this supposed threat in Iran, which was never a threat to the United States. So, there's reasons behind what the empire does. And in the 20th century, as I've said before, what it does is increasingly incompetent as far as it used to do things that that would benefit the empire, but not necessarily us, little people. But it does things now that doesn't even benefit the empire. So taking out Saddam Hussein was a really dumb idea if you had some kind of problem with Iran, because now Iraq is very friendly to Iran. It's run by Shiites that we put in power. DC put in power. All right. So anyway, that's the whole thing about this refrain from interfering in each other's internal affairs is all that's an Iran talking point. Stop trying to overthrow our governments. And all these revolts that you hear about, and it wasn't just, I mean, during the Obama years, during the Bush years, they're always talking about the people rising up. That's all the CIA. I mean, come on. Stop. I mean, if you're not going to believe the deep state when Obama or Biden is in there, don't believe them when Trump is in there. That just makes you look like a moron. Okay. Every one of these revolts 10 years ago, 15 years ago, 20, these are all color revolutions that the US deep state perpetrates in many countries. Right at the beginning of the Ukraine war, they tried it in several of the border states next to Russia. Didn't succeed because Russia saw it coming. All right, they tried it in Hong Kong. I'm not sure they really wanted to overthrow Chinese rule in Hong Kong, but that whole street protest, I mean, you had a guy reading Patrick Henry, a Chinese guy with a completely American accent. So, your bullshit meter should not stop when your guy turn off when your guy gets elected. I mean, it just makes you look like an idiot. All right. So anyway, that's number two. I'm going to race through these because I don't want to spend 2 hours reading them, but they both commit to negotiating a final deal immediately. The U.S. lifts its blockade. But notice the language about the blockade and Iran's, whatever you call it, blockade of the strait. It says immediately upon signing of this MOU, immediately, the United States will begin the removal of its naval blockade and any disturbances against the Islamic Republic of Iran and will fully end the naval blockade within 30 days. During this period, the traffic of vessels will be in proportion to the numbers of pre-war traffic being restored by the Islamic Republic of Iran. The United States further undertakes to remove its forces from the proximity of the Islamic Republic of Iran within 30 days after the final deal. That means the troops that would have been going back to those bombed bases, they're not going back. Huge. I mean, this is Trump unconditionally surrendering to Iran. He's still claiming they surrendered unconditionally. They have chased the United States off their borders, out of the region, and they've closed the strait. And what they say about opening the strait, upon signing of this MOU, the Islamic Republic of Iran will make arrangements using its best efforts for the safe passage of commercial vessels with no charge for 60 days only from the Persian Gulf to the Sea of Oman and vice versa. Traffic of commercial vessels will start taking out the mines, basically, and other impediments. But they're reserving the right after 60 days to charge a toll, which is really not all that unreasonable because other countries with similar, what do you call it, passageways? What's the, not right of way, but when your house has has a road on it that you agree when you buy the house to let people drive through, whatever that's called, that's what they have here. So other countries charge tolls, when you sail through their territorial waters. So this is not, but Iran's reserving the right. Remember how much the U.S. was pounding the table? You don't have the right to, charge a toll for an international waterway. Well, it's not an international waterway. It's their waterway and Oman's. So they're going to, let Oman participate in that. Point number 6, The U.S. will develop a mutually agreed plan with at least USD 300 billion for the reconstruction and economic development of the Islamic Republic. The U.S. signed on to that. We're going to pay reparations for the damages. And they're also going to charge a toll at the Strait. So that was originally like in lieu of getting paid for damages. Now they're getting both. The United States agrees we're going to lift all the sanctions for the past 2 decades on Iran. Lift it. Now, don't forget, that benefits you and me. I mean, none of these sanctions benefit the average American. They only benefit the empire. And there's some question whether they even benefit the empire, to be honest with you, because the empire's only interest in the Middle East, as I've said before, is that oil flows out of it. That's it. And all of our efforts on behalf of Israel has only interrupted that. So, from a completely ruthless point of view, the U.S. would be better off just abandoning Israel and making buddies with all the Middle East states. Now, there's a good, I personally support the existence of a state of Israel, not being ignorant of 2,000 years of history since the Romans destroyed Jerusalem and all the persecution. And I'd like there to be a parcel of ground where Jews from anywhere in the world could put their feet on the ground and they're not a foreigner or an outsider. Now, if they become United States citizens, they're not a foreigner. But in every country they've been in, they've done something that we would consider admirable, which is to maintain their culture, almost maintain their nation without any ground to put it on. And it's really an incredible achievement when you think about it, that they've been able to do that. And I think the whole world was behind them after the Holocaust. We got to get these people somewhere, again, where they can put their feet on the ground and this is their home. The problem is that ever since that agreement in 1947, Israel has been expanding. And they have their argument for why. And we'll fight that fight another day. But that's where all the tension comes from. It really isn't from just Israel existing. Now, the Muslim, fanatics could say that, whatever. But what really has caused all of the fighting has been expansion into the West Bank, Gaza, and Lebanon, and Syria. They're also in Syria, by the way, right now. As soon as they got rid of Assad, Israel went into Syria. And as far as I know, they're still there. So we'll get to that another day. Let's stay on this agreement. Islamic Republic of Iran reaffirms that it shall not procure or develop nuclear weapons. So Trump is walking around saying if he didn't do this war, they would have had nuclear weapons. This is Iranian language that got in. The word reaffirms is in there because Iran insisted it be in there. In other words, we've been saying we don't want a nuclear weapon for 20 years. We haven't tried to get one. Your own intelligence says we haven't tried to get one. We participated and cooperated with inspections until you guys ripped up the deal under which we got inspected. Okay, so, they reaffirm we're not going to try to get a weapon. So is there anything else meaningful in here? Maintain the status quo. Okay, immediately the U.S. issues waivers. So in other words, because the sanctions aren't listed until the final deal, the U.S. is going to issue waivers for export of crude oil. So basically effectually lifting the sanctions in a temporary way until the final deal is frozen. Paragraph 11, they get back all the money that the U.S. government stole from them, about $24 billion. So that's their own money, as opposed to the $300 billion that's going to be arranged somehow. And now all the U.S. officials are going around saying, oh, it's not going to be U.S. taxpayer money. Yeah, it is. Sure it is. But in any case, to rebuild that's outside money, the $300 billion. This $24 billion is their own money. And by the way, I'll remind you that the money that Obama gave them when he made the JCPOA, that was their money too. That was also U.S. money frozen. And the reason he gave it to them in cash is the Iranians don't trust the United States. And why should they? Paragraph 13, the United States and the Islamic Republic will start negotiating to do the final deal. Okay. And then 14, the final deal will be endorsed by a binding United Nations Security Council resolution. So that's the demands. Notice there's nothing in there about them not supporting proxies. They have not agreed not to do that. They're going to keep enriching in for peaceful purposes, for energy and medical reasons. So you need uranium enriched more for medical reasons than you do for, like, to make medical isotopes. It costs more. You have to enrich farther than to do energy. Just want to check and see. I don't believe that. I just want to go back to paragraph 8. The two parties also agree to discuss the issue of enrichment and other mutually agreed matters related to the Islamic Republic of Iran's nuclear needs based on a satisfactory framework being agreed upon in the final deal. The final deal will confirm the provisions of this paragraph. The United States of America and the Islamic Republic acknowledge the critical importance of the nuclear issues above mentioned and express their intention to immediately address these issues in the negotiation according to achieve a mutual agreement. So they're going to talk about enrichment. And I'm sure Iran will agree to some limit, some low limit. Somewhere in here, the signing, there's a issue. I was trying to search on it, but I can't do it while I'm sharing my screen, so I'll stop doing that. So the other thing that I'm not sure is in the MOU, but I'm pretty sure Iran is somewhat agreed to, is about that 60% enriched uranium. So, oh, my keyboard was off. That's why I couldn't. Yeah, so that's not mentioned in here. Oh, yes, it is. Sorry, I started the paragraph too late. So maybe I'll let you see this again too. So the Islamic Republic of Iran reaffirms that it shall not procure or develop nuclear weapons. The United States and the America have agreed to resolve the disposition of stockpile enriched material pursuant to a mechanism that will be mutually agreed upon in accordance with the schedule maintained in paragraph 7, with the minimum methodology to be down blending on site under the supervision of the IAEA. So the IAEA is the international organization that pretty much enforces, does the inspections for the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, which Iran is a signatory to, and which names nuclear programs for purposes as the inalienable right of non-nuclear weapon countries like Iran. So telling them they can't enrich at all, it's a little gray because the word enrichment is not in the non-nuclear proliferation treaty, but it says you can have a nuclear program for energy and for medical purposes. I think it just says for peaceful purposes, so that if some non-weapons use is discovered later, they would still be able to pursue that. So, I think in Iran's case, you could reasonably argue, look, with what the United States has done to us historically, we need to enrich our own uranium, because who knows what they'll do if we depend on outside sources. Not to mention, we're doing this for peaceful purposes. We were expected for years and found to be compliant. So in any case, I am not surprised that, and I think I predicted this earlier, that they would agree to get rid of that 60% enriched uranium. So remember, that's still not weapons grade, but you could take that and make it weapons grade a lot faster than you could 20% enriched or 5% enriched. So there's this whole process where you have to keep cycling it, through the process to get it, and it takes time to get it to weapons grade. And that's why they did the 60%. It was a response to, I believe, a 2021 sabotage operation by Israel, again, responding to Israel, of its nuclear program. And it claims it wasn't enriching beyond 20% before that. And then it announced, we're going to enrich to 60 because you guys did this. And then it did it. And I don't know if this has been buried by US bombings, that particular stockpile. That's what they talk. Trump keeps talking about digging out the nuclear dust, whatever wherever he got that expression. And it may very well have been hit and buried and inaccessible. But like Iran's saying, look, there's a process where we can de-enrich it back down to 20% or wherever they need it for whatever use they're going to use it for, peaceful use. And maybe that's what we'll do with this, but we will resolve this. They're agreeing in principle, we will cease to possess 60% enriched uranium. We're willing to agree to that. So that's about the only step, the only concession they make in the whole agreement. And it's not really a concession if it's true that they weren't trying to make a weapon anyway, right? So, I mean, to me, they got every one of their demands. And if you could go back and look at the podcast back in April, I was already saying their demands haven't changed. They never changed. And I was saying they will never change. And this war won't end until the US agrees to all of them. And the US has agreed to all of them. So the US has unconditionally surrendered to Iran in this conflict that the US started with Israel. And then, of course, again, the day after or 2 days after it's signed, Hezbollah hits those soldiers in Lebanon. One way you could say it wasn't initiating because, Hezbollah obviously hit those soldiers in response to the announcement by Israel it was not leaving Lebanon till it felt like it or its objectives had been met. And, Hezbollah said, okay, well, we're going to attack you then because you're in our country. And then, of course, Israel responded. And Trump's response to that is to say Iran is finished. So that's where we are today. Trump writing another check he can't cash other than dropping a nuke on them or nukes, which I don't think he's going to do, and which would absolutely make the United States a pariah on the world stage. So we'll see if we're just going to go on for another extended period of this. Remember, the clock is ticking, right? The SPR, the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, is running out. So you can't just go back to the status quo where Trump just, threatens to destroy Iran, then says, hey, we got a new deal. The deal's signed. Now everyone's just got to, obey it. And this is why you're seeing all this hostility towards Bibi Netanyahu for the first time in a long time from the U.S. government. I should say this crazy blank check that the U.S. government has been giving Israel for the last, basically since 9/11, was not always the case. The U.S. always supported the existence of Israel right from the beginning, but it used to treat them like every other ally. You want our help, you do what we say, and you don't act against our interests, and you certainly don't bomb the hell out of a country the day after we signed a peace MOU with them. So, now Trump is basically acting like U.S. presidents before 9/11 did, before George W. Bush. And he's saying he's pushing back. Now, Israel has always had a powerful lobby here, and pushing back has always had political consequences. It did for, I think the first one to really fold was Clinton. And ever since, he folded, but still he reserved the right to tell the Israeli government, you will do this, you won't do that. And then, after 9/11, basically they do whatever they want and they still get unconditional support and monetary aid. Now, I'm against all foreign aid, but if you're going to give it to anybody, especially in that region, then I don't relatively oppose it going to Israel. But they got to do what we say, right? We're the ones paying them. We're the ones supporting them. And I think the demands have been reasonable about their conduct. The ones Trump's making now are the kinds of demands every president made before 9/11. So again, me personally, I do want to see the state of Israel exist. I think they ought to pull back. Well, obviously, I think they must get out of Lebanon and Syria, unless Syria agrees to let them stay there with their new you know, ISIS ruler installed by the US, who's now our buddy. And then they got to make some kind of deal with the Palestinians. And believe me, no one knows more than I do how difficult they are to deal with. But, you know, you've got them in Gaza in this tiny little area on the coast. And then you got this very large area called the West Bank. And somehow or other, they got to make a deal with them. And I would think that if you're going to have a Palestinian nation, it's got to have some access to the open sea. So it should be around Gaza. It's very difficult because the two areas are separated by quite a bit of territory. And of course, there's quite a bit of Israel below Gaza, south of Gaza. So you can't just give them a strip across. It's really a mess. There's no easy solution, but they got to do something at some point. And were they to do that, I think, my opinion is that a deal could be worked out where their security would be guaranteed and you'd stop getting all this terrorism and rockets and the whole thing. I've also researched a little. I guess there have been proposals. One I thought was my brilliant idea, but I guess it's been proposed by many others in the past, is some kind of alliance that includes Israel, Iran, Turkey, all the big powers, and then all these other little Middle East countries, and does not include the United States, China, or Russia. Get the big powers out of there and form your own security agreement. And then once you're in the same agreement, then Israel doesn't have to worry about Iran anymore and vice versa. Yeah, just one idea. But what do I know, right? I only predicted exactly what this deal would look like months ago. But let's leave it there. Let's see what happens. I kind of have a feeling that Trump is behind the scenes, got all his howitzers blazing at Bibi, Netanyahu, and also at whoever he has contacts with Hezbollah, saying, cut the shit, because I made this deal and you're not going to make me look bad. And maybe a U.S. president is ready to impose some consequences on the Israeli government. That would be great. Let's get back to a normal relationship with them and see if we can get out of this disastrous war, because there's nothing ahead but pain because of it. And the longer it drags on and the strait remains closed, because as of today, it's still closed, the worse the pain is going to be. So as always, let me remind you, maybe this is the first time you've seen the podcast or heard it. Please subscribe. Please check out the video version over on YouTube. It's still up and down as far as views go. A lot more people listening in the car, I guess, like I do. Since I have a couple hours in the car almost every weekday, I mean, that's where I do the majority of my podcast listening. But if you like video, we've got one on YouTube. And also get over to my Substack, tom.mullen@substack.com. As usual, I'll break every rule as far as, yes, tom.mullen. I should know this by heart. tom.mullen@substack.com. Oh, I'm sorry, tommullen.substack.com. All right. Sorry, tommullen.substack.com. There's a lot of material, and most of the articles have a lot of good material that you can see for free. And then, of course, if you like what you're reading, you can become a paid supporter, which really helps me out. And then you get access to even more content, including transcripts from this show when I feel like they're especially good. Maybe I'll do one of this. And feel free, of course, to request a transcript if you're a paid member at any time. So check that out and get on my email list. You can get a free copy of my book. It's The Fed Stupid, and the Fed is going to be playing a ever increasing role in what happens over the next year or so. So you go there, you get on my email list, you get a free copy of that book, and kind of an introduction. It's got some stuff going back to 2008 that I've written about the Federal Reserve, which plays a huge role in our economic lives, an unconstitutional and very deleterious role in our economic lives. So go to itsthefedstupid.com, get a free copy of that book, and I'll see you next time on Tom Mullen Talks Freedom.
The war of ideas has only just begun. Arm yourself with the knowledge you need by heading to TomMullenTalksFreedom.com and subscribing to our email list. And remember, every revolution starts in the minds of the people.